Today we are making a scrunchie. These scrunchies are super easy, perfect for beginning sewers, and they can be made from just about any material that you want. However, if you are new to sewing, I would recommend a woven cotton material as that will be the easiest to work with. There are 7 different scrunchies that we'll be making today, and you can actually skip around in the video to find the one that you need help with. The classic scrunchie is exactly how it sounds. The extra fluffy scrunchie has extra volume to it, so it has a lot more folds. And the extra tall scrunchie stands up taller. It is wider in diameter, so it stands up taller on your wrist. This is the bunny ear scrunchie. This is the bandana scarf scrunchie. This is the long tail scrunchie. And this is the toddler scrunchie. All of the patterns except the toddler scrunchie will start here by making the scrunchie first, and if you want to add the bunny ears, the long tail, or the scarf to it, we'll do that in a later step. But whether you're doing the extra fluffy, extra tall, or the classic scrunchie, they all start the same way. I'm going to start with the most popular, which is the professional finish to the scrunchies, but if you are looking for the easy version, skip ahead to about the 7-minute mark, which is where I start the instructions for that. I am using a crushed velvet material for my scrunchie today. I have my scrunchie template already laid out on the fabric, and it's really important that your fabric is folded before you cut it, and as you put the template on there, make sure that it is folded at the bottom. Iron your material and then fold it in half so that right sides are touching. Pin the fabric in place so that it won't slip when you're sewing. With your tape measure, measure 1 inch from the edge and use a pin to mark that spot because you do not want to sew over that section. And you'll do this on both ends of the fabric. Sew a straight stitch all the way down this open edge, leaving the 1 inch gap at the top and the bottom. And make sure that you backstitch at both the beginning and the end of this stitch. After you have removed the pins, turn the scrunchie inside out. Now it's time to join the 2 ends together. So you're going to place them back to back where they're touching, and you're going to pin them in place. But you'll only be pinning 2 layers of fabric together, not all 4 at the same time. So you kind of have to go around a curve a little bit to get them both pinned in place. And you are pinning the right sides together. This is a small and tight place, but keep opening up that fabric and trying to pin all the way around until you've gotten to the edge of the other side from where you started. When you've gotten them both pinned together, you're going to sew a line around this curve, catching both sides of the fabric in it, but trying not to catch any of the scrunchie that you've already sewed. So just go slow when you're sewing this section. You can stop often to adjust your fabric or adjust your needle in place. Take your pins out and then you're going to tuck that side that you just sewed into your scrunchie. So now you have a long tube of fabric that is sewed together with a gap opening at the top, and that is where we'll be putting our elastic in. Attach your elastic to a bodkin or a safety pin and then put one end into the gap, threading it all the way through your scrunchie, and you will need to scrunch your fabric as it goes through. Try to keep the tail end of the elastic out the whole time because you will need it at the very end. When you've successfully gotten your elastic through to the other side, you are going to take the two ends of the elastic and overlap them before sewing them securely in the sewing machine. You're going to sew over this overlap several times. You could do like an X type pattern, making sure that you're back stitching so that it's really secure. And then feed the elastic back into the gap of the scrunchie. It is time to sew it or close it up completely. You're going to just tuck in those raw edges ever so slightly and then sew a line across there to secure that gap closed. I suggest pinning it, and I didn't do this in the video, but it is smart to use a color thread that matches the fabric so that it won't show at the end. Now I'm going to demonstrate how to make the scrunchie, but using an easier finish. After you've cut out your scrunchie pattern, you're going to fold it in half so that right sides are together and put it in place so that it won't slip around when you're sewing. You are going to sew this long edge closed, starting at the top and going all the way down to the bottom. Use a straight stitch for this and back stitch at both the beginning and the end. After you've removed all the pins, turn the scrunchie right side out. And iron it. Attach your elastic to the bodkin or the safety pin and push it through one end of your fabric. Make sure that you keep the tail of the elastic out the whole time because you will need it at the end to finish it. Scrunch your fabric down so that you can overlap the two ends of the elastic and then sew them securely into place while they're overlapped. It's really important that you do a lot of back stitching when you're sewing this so that the elastic stays really secure. And you can even do like an X pattern on there to make sure that it's nice and tight. Now to finish the scrunchie, you're going to tuck in one edge of the fabric into the other edge, and then you're going to tuck the raw edges of that outside piece under just a little bit so that they can be sewed down in place and that no raw edges will be showing at the end. You're going to do a straight stitch down these two overlapped edges and over the elastic, and it's easiest to pin it in place once you have it. I didn't do this in the video, but it would be best to use a thread for this part that matches your fabric. Take the pins out and then scrunch your gathers around so that the whole scrunchie is even. Then you are done. These are the instructions for adding the bunny ears onto the scrunchie you just made. After cutting out your bunny ear plate piece, lay it flat and then fold it in half so that right sides are touching. You'll need to pin it in place so that it won't slip around when you're sewing. Okay, you are ready to sew, but it's important that you remember to leave that gap in the middle of the bunny ears. So you're going to sew around one curve, stop, pick up your needle, start at the other curve, and then finish at the end. Using that gap, you're going to turn the bunny ears right side out. Use a blunt tool to poke out the points of the ears, and then you will have that gap opening that you can decide what to do with. If you want to, you can sew that closed after you tuck the raw edges in, or you can just iron it closed. Since this probably most likely won't ever be washed, that's what I typically do, and that open gap is covered by the knot that I make. Okay, it's time to tie the bunny ears onto your finished scrunchie. Try to tie them around the seam if you did the easy finish scrunchie, or if you did the professional finish. Either way, it's nice to cover up that seam with the knot. And just adjust your ears so that they are even on both sides. Then you are finished. These are the instructions for adding the bandana scarf to your finished scrunchie. As it says in the title, I typically start with an already complete bandana. I like to buy silk bandanas or cotton bandanas. You can usually get them for pretty inexpensive on the internet. And you're just going to fold the fabric in to make it one long piece. The reason why I start with a bandana is so that I don't have to hem the edges of a large piece of fabric, but that is always an option if you do not want to buy a pre-finished bandana. You're going to tie the bandana around the seam of your scrunchie. You don't need to double knot it, just tie it once and try to keep the tails even as possible. These are instructions for adding the long tail to your already finished scrunchie. After cutting out your long tail piece, lay it out and fold it so that right sides are touching together. Then you're going to pin it in place so that it does not slip around when you are sewing it. While you're pinning it, fold it in half again to find the middle of the piece, and then mark about 1/2 inch from that edge with your pin. Flip it over and mark the same spot on the other side with another pin, because you're going to be leaving a gap in the middle of your sewing when you are closing up this edge. You're going to be sewing from one end all the way up to the gap, stopping, and then all the way down to the other end. This is what it looks like when you're all done. Then you're going to use that gap that you left to turn the piece right side out and use a blunt tool to poke out the corners of this piece. Then decide what to do about that gap opening, if you want to tuck the raw edges in and sew it shut, or if you just want to iron it shut, since it most likely won't be washed and that gap will be covered in the knot. Iron it flat and then you will tie it around your scrunchie. Make sure to tie it around the seam of your scrunchie to cover that part up, and you can just tie it one time and pull the edges out so that it is nice and even on both sides. These are the instructions for the toddler scrunchie with the optional bow knot at the top. After cutting out your scrunchie piece, fold it in half so that right sides are facing each other, and iron it in place and pin it if you would like to. Sew a straight stitch from the top all the way down to the bottom, closing up that edge. Then you're going to turn this piece right side out. This is going to be a little bit tricky because it's such a small space. Attach your elastic to a bodkin or a safety pin and begin to thread it through one end of your scrunchie, scrunching the fabric down as you push it through, and make sure to keep the tail end of that elastic out of the scrunchie so that you can use it to finish off your piece. Use the two elastic ends to tie a knot in the elastic, and go ahead and double knot that knot so that it is nice and secure. Poke the elastic inside the scrunchie as well as tuck one side of the scrunchie into the other side. And push down the raw edges of the outside piece so that they're no longer showing. They're going to be tucked inside as well. And sew a straight stitch down that line. Adjust the gathers and you are finished. To do the bow knot at the top, lay out the piece and again fold it right sides together and iron in place. But this time, instead of sewing one long stitch, you're going to sew from each edge and leave a gap in the middle. With this gap, you are going to turn the piece right side out and again poke out those corner pieces using a blunt tool. You can decide if you want to tuck the raw edges in of that gap opening and stitch it closed, or just iron it closed, because that section will be covered by the knot that you're about to make. Look for the seam of the scrunchie to cover that with your bow knot. Tie it once and adjust the edges of the bow so that they are even, and you are all done.